have a little fun, education, reminisce, and really makes you intrigued to check out some of these films again. And that's Joe Fortunato. He is film study professor, and really excited that Joe takes time to join us each week on the show. And he's doing one of my favorite movies today. Mr. Fortunato, take it from there.
Good morning, Ray. Good morning, everybody. And yes, welcome to another favorite, I think. This is a very popular movie, although it didn't start that way. And we'll talk about that. It's the 45th anniversary of the Stanley Kubrick classic horror film, The Shining, which was released in 1980. As I just said, directed by Stanley Kubrick, based on the book or the novel by Stephen King. The screenplay was written by Stanley Kubrick and Diane Johnson. And of course, it stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, young Danny Lloyd, Scatman Crothers. And I mentioned that this is it generally received unfavorable reviews upon its initial release, but over time it's really gathered steam. It's now regarded as one of the best horror movies ever made. In 2001, it was ranked number 29 on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Thrills list. Jack Torrance, the character played by Jack Nicholson, was named the 25th greatest villain on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains, and it was voted the 9th scariest film of all time by Entertainment Weekly. Not only were critics kind of disappointed, but Stephen King was disappointed in the film. He really never understood why people find the movie so scary. He notes there's only one on-screen murder in the film, although I don't know that that's officially the litmus test of what makes something scary or not. So many of the iconic moments in the film were not part of the original book. So maybe that's where there's a little disconnect with Stephen King. Just a handful of them here, or a small handful. That would include the famous elevator full of blood, the "Here's Johnny" line. Jack uses an axe. In the book, it was a croquet mallet. The famous maze out in the snow. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Danny riding his tricycle. All of that was not in the novel. So it was all made for the film. I mentioned young Danny Lloyd. He's the young boy that played Danny in the film. He was so young, this was his first acting job, and Kubrick was really highly protective of the child. He didn't treat others on the set as well, especially Shelley Duvall. We'll get to that. But during the shooting of the movie, Danny Lloyd was under the impression that the film they were making was a drama, not a horror movie. It wasn't until he grew up later and saw the uncut version of the film when he was 17, 11 years after, that he realized, oh my gosh, I was in a horror movie. And that was all protected by Stanley Kubrick. The scene where Jack breaks down the bathroom door and kind of says the famous line, "Here's Johnny." The props department built a door that could easily be broken, which is kind of typical for a film like that. But however, Jack Nicholson had worked as a volunteer fire marshal earlier in his life, and he tore it apart too easily. So the props department had to build a stronger door. In fact, they built many of them, actually. Nicholson and Duvall said that this was one of the hardest films of their career. In fact, Nicholson considers Shelley Duvall's performance the most difficult role he's ever seen an actress take on. And Duvall also considered this the hardest performance of her life. She suffered nervous exhaustion throughout the filming, physical illness, hair loss. She was in such a constant state of hysteria on screen that she eventually ran out of tears from crying too hard. Wow. So it was a very rough film for Shelley Duvall.
All right. So Shelley Duvall had some problems. This really, not that Jack Nicholson's career wasn't rolling, but boy, this really took him to another level. So I always like it when you talk about casting. Any interesting stories in regards to casting with this flick, Joe?
Well, not so much on the Jack Nicholson, although we'll get to a few of those. But Stanley Kubrick originally wanted Slim Pickens to play the part of Halloran. That went to Scatman Crothers. But Pickens wanted nothing to do with Kubrick because he had such a bad experience with him on Dr. Strangelove, which he had done, many, many years earlier. There was a few other names considered for the role of Jack Torrance. That's the Nicholson part. They considered Robert De Niro and Robin Williams. And also Harrison Ford briefly was considered. So a few other names in the hopper, but Jack Nicholson was there from the beginning. Mm-hmm. I mentioned the famous line, "Here's Johnny." That was voted as the 68th greatest movie quote by American Film Institute. And the interesting thing is that because he lived in England, Stanley Kubrick was not familiar with the "Here's Johnny" line from The Tonight Show, because they didn't have The Tonight Show in England. That Jack Nicholson improvised that, and Kubrick very nearly didn't use it because I don't know what this is. That's kind of interesting. All of the interior rooms of the Overlook Hotel were filmed at Elstree Studios in England, including the Colorado Lounge, where Jack does all of his typing. All makes Jack a dull boy. This was the same area eventually used by Spielberg as the snake pit, or the snake-filled well of souls, in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So the same room where Jack is doing his typing is the same set as the well of souls in Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just went, that's interesting. That's all.
Yeah. Speaking of the set there, because the film ran so long in its production, much longer than anticipated, both the Reds and Raiders of the Lost Ark were delayed because they were waiting to shoot in that studio. So The Shining delayed a couple of other classics as well. At the time, the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association, did not allow blood to be shown in any trailers that would be seen by all ages. So there's the famous scene of the blood pouring out of the elevator, and Stanley Kubrick persuaded the MPAA that the blood was really just rusty water, and they got the trailer passed, and people could see it. I mentioned that other films that were shot in there. This was the same studio that was used for The Empire Strikes Back, which we just recently talked about. And in fact, some of the fake snow from Empire Strikes Back was also used for this film. So there's a weird connection there.
Wow, a lot of innuendos. Now, what about, you mentioned the inside shots of the glorious hotel. I forget what it was called. What about the outside shots? Was that also from England?
No. A little bit of a mix here. The maze was inside.
Okay.
And it's a sort of a compilation of, smaller chunks of the maze.
Yeah.
The larger maze was sort of a matte painting. But the much of the maze was inside a set. In fact, it was so hot in the set because there was they didn't have it air conditioned. A lot of the actors were sweltering, and the crew were sweltering. What was supposed to be, a frigid environment, as you mentioned. And the other part is that there was an exterior shot of the real hotel, and they didn't want them to use the room number that was in the book, because they said, oh my gosh, they're going to go into this movie and no one's going to want to ever stay in that room again.
Yeah.
So they changed the room number to room 237, which has been sort of an iconic number. There is no room 237 in the real hotel. And that actually even turned into a documentary film about the interpretations of The Shining. It's called Room 237, and fans of the film should check that out if they haven't already.
There you go, The Shining Film School with Joe Fortunato. Kind of gets you want to put that doggone thing on again this weekend, right? And
well, we say that every week, and I agree.
That's a good one. Joe, anything going on over at your website you want to clue our listeners into?
Some of my regular stuff, obviously I share this weekly thing if you miss it. And I have my Twilight Zone podcast that's kind of intermittent. I'm sort of one of rotating hosts that I do about every month or so people are interested in that. And again, we'll have a couple of things coming up in a month or so, and probably next week or the week after we'll start talking about that. But you can get a preview by going to joefortunato.net. That's joefortunato.net. And see all the stuff that I'm doing.
All right, terrific. Joe, thanks again for making time for us. A good one, certainly this week, The Shining.